Hi, Zizaran here with another YouTube video, and today we are going to be reacting to Lilith. Especially this part. It's a good part. Great. Love Lilith. We do have exciting news for those that haven't seen it yet.
Season 2 will be our biggest update to Diablo IV since launch.
So come join us in the hunt.
Oh no, they're muted! They're doing my thing, but it's not a bit.
Diablo IV campfire chat.
So the class team and really the whole Diablo IV team has been very busy with improving the game. So our strategy for the Season of Blood is kind of a 5-point strategy. The high-level goal here was we were focusing on addressing player feedback and really making systemic improvements to the game. We wanted to improve the whole foundation of the game from the ground up as much as we could.
What this means is that if you have, say, 20% poison resistance, and then you grab another piece of gear that has 20% more, your character stat sheet will actually show that you have 36% poison resistance. And that's because there's a diminishing returns. On the more resistance you get, it will never quite get you up to 100%. It's always kind of like 20% of the, the remaining amount. So it doesn't quite get you up to 100%. And this means that you can stack resistances essentially infinitely. There's no hard cap. You could get resistance on every piece of gear, and it would contribute to reducing that damage that you're taking. Additionally, right now, armor contributes both to elemental damage reduction. It kind of gets factored into this calculation, and it also reduces the physical damage you've taken from just enemies' regular attacks instead of the elemental attacks. So going forward into the Season of Blood, resistances are going to change how they're calculated, and they're now going to be additive. So that means if you have the 20% poison resistance and you grab another piece that has 20% more, you're going to have 40% resistance on your character stat sheet exactly as you would expect. Although, since this adds up additively now, we do need to add a cap. So the resistances are going to be capped at a baseline of 70%. So your character can stack as up to 70% resistance.
What does Pathomech still have? 75?
There are some effects
in
the game that allow you to go up to 85% with various effects that increase
their max
your
is 90?
max
85 an hour.
But those are rather rare because they are quite powerful. Additionally, armor is also going to only affect physical damage. As it used to do both, it's now only going to be calculated when you're taking physical damage and not when you're taking elemental damage. Additionally, to kind of make everyone have a baseline level of resistances, we're going to be updating rings so that they have all resistance at all times. Amulets already have all resistance, but rings used to have 2 separate elemental resistance. They could have, say, fire resistance plus cold resistance. Now they'll have all resistance along with one random one, such as fire resistance.
PoE players are fucking
weird
weird
our overall goals
because
from
what he said, you're basically risk capping from 3 pieces of gear, and this is the way it should have been from the start.
As we're going through and
it's also
tuning
their
a
gear
lot
is
of the
very
numbers
basic
and the balance of everything that's coming in
That's
Season
why we're
of Blood.
laughing.
I mean, there's a lot in Season of Blood, obviously.
Like,
maybe it's
this is the way it should have been at the start.
Them.
We're saying this is better than everybody stacking armor as the OV defense.
It's that we give you a lot
I mean, they can make it better, but this would have been better at start, and then make it better from here. But at launch, we just had attack and defense.
Rather than, I really want to highlight this elixir here. We've updated all of the elemental resist elixirs so that they also include, you can see here, a maximum poison resistance increased by 6%. And that's really impactful.
Too often players really don't feel good when
Will
they
you
drop.
apologize?
And really what is an alarm bell for me personally is that, when there's a unique for your build and it's intended to be good for that build, like say like a fireball unique for a fireball sorcerer, and then a fireball sorcerer doesn't even want that, right? Like we don't want that situation to happen, whether it's because the unique effect isn't good enough or the stats on the gear aren't good enough. We want to make sure these are exciting and awesome and attractive to get. So we did a giant pass, and we updated nearly every single unique in the game. Not all of them, but pretty close. And then the last one is updating unique effects. This is really like,
I mean, this sounds really good.
The special thing
like
that
a big pass on uniques would be very exciting
for
for me.
Here, you do go through some actual changes. So the first one is Fists of Fate. This is our favorite random item where everything's just lucky hit and chance based. One of the issues with this unique is that, because a lot of your stats on your gloves are damage related, and this one doesn't really give you that direct
Is that all they're
damage
changing?
power. we're taking one of the lucky hit effects and changing it to a new stat that doesn't exist anywhere else in the game. That's basically a chance to give you a damage buff for a certain amount of time. So now this will make up for some of that, not giving you your, skill rank stats or other things, but now it gives you some damage. Next one, we've got the Grasp of Shadow. This is a rogue unique that's themed around summoning shadow clones to do damage. You can see on the left, that's the old version. The shadow clone damage range was between 14 to 21%, and now it can roll between 31 and 52%, so it's much higher.
They really don't get it. Can they
Attractive than
just
it
play
used to be.
D2? And then
the last one, updating unique effects. This is another Barbarian unique, Ancient's Oath.
It's just more
the
damage.
powerful effect, straight
they have
up a
so
lot more
cool
powerful
items
than
in
it
D2. Am I the only one that feels like
here we're gonna
D2
go through
uniques
some
are
of
more
the
fun than
uniques specifically
D4?
that we're adding that you can, and it says that when you cast Hurricane and then you cast Boulder while your Hurricane is active, your Boulder will actually spin around you and get caught in the Hurricane. And yes, you can actually have multiple boulders going on
Oh,
at
Blade
once.
Vortex. I like this.
Pretty awesome.
Yeah, this one's awesome. That's what we want!
All right, next we're going to be talking
Like,
about
just
class
do more stuff
improvements.
like
This is the next
that!
part of our strategy, which is really looking at the issues that the community's been talking about with every class and
Before you actually jump in, because I know we're
kinda get it.
the item modules on. You talked about target farming, like what can I actually target farm off of these new bosses?
That's good. I like that.
We wanted to make sure that we actually showcase that list here, so every player can actually see all the uniques that they can actually target farm specifically from these bosses.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about the damage bucket changes. And when I refer to damage buckets, I'm mainly talking about critical strike damage, vulnerable damage, and overpower damage as well. So in Season of the Malignant, vulnerable and critical strike damage were different buckets, and mixing these two, so if you critical struck a vulnerable enemy, would kind of multiply all of your critical strike damage by all of your vulnerable damage, and you just get more than the sum of your parts, like dramatically more. And this meant that the optimal way for basically every single build in the game to play was to stack critical strike damage, was to stack vulnerable damage, and then just make enemies vulnerable, and then crit them. That's how you did most damage in Season of Malignant, no matter what your build, no matter what your class. And so that meant that, say, if an item dropped that had plus crit chance, plus crit damage, and plus vulnerable
That's what they're
damage,
doing.
that was best
That's what they're
in slot
doing,
for
chat.
literally everyone.
I see you.
And that was unhealthy. It was leading to a lot of stagnation, a lot of builds that could not fully utilize critical strike or vulnerable, say builds like dot builds, because dots can't crit. They couldn't really capitalize on this in the same way, and they got left behind builds that could. So
the next slide, I think? Or?
yeah, so moving forward into the Season of Blood, critical strike damage, vulnerable, and
This is a
overpower as
buffant.
well are going to be different buckets, but mixing them will only give multiplicative damage bonuses capped at a certain amount. So if an enemy is vulnerable, you're going to deal 20% more damage to them. And it doesn't matter how much additional plus vulnerable damage you get, it's not going to increase the 20% multiplicative amount. Same with critical strike, it'll give you 50% multiplicative damage. And then overpower as well. If you overpower an enemy, similar to crit, it'll give you up to 50% bonus damage based on your health total. Overpower calculations are...
What?
It has a
Wait.
multiplicative aspect up to 50%, just like
This
crit and vulnerable.
And it'll
Killed
scale
my
and just be
will to
better.
play
Yes, it'll
Yeah, so
entire season
overpower
2.
was definitely not overpowered in Season of the Malignant. It was rather on the weekend.
Why did I put
And
lids on
here
the
going into
buckets?
Season of
That
to
must
be
be the
doing very well in
worst
this season.
possible solution.
So let's go over an actual example here with numbers just to clarify what I mean. So if you have 150% critical strike damage, that's what it shows on your character sheet, right? That's how much critical strike damage you have. It also factors in this 50% bonus damage that you deal anytime you crit. And similarly, if you have 200% vulnerable damage, it also factors in that 20% vulnerable damage that is just baseline to vulnerable application. Previously, we would take the entire 150% and multiply it by 200%, and that would be your damage output. It would scale really high. But now we're going to take whatever damage you would deal, and we're going to multiply it by 1.5 because it's a crit, and then we're going to take that result and multiply it by 1.2 because the enemy is vulnerable. And that's why the 50% and the 20% combine to 80. It doesn't combine to 70 because you're multiplying them together. Like I said, so you still get some synergy where it's greater than the sum of its parts, but no longer is it the full 150 and the full 200. We're just always going to take the 50 and the 20. And so that should give us a bit more scaling will be a bit more consistent
What?
across crit and vulnerable, and you're not going to be incentivized to every build has to stack critical strike damage and has to stack vulnerable. It'll still be valuable to do it for builds that are interested in that.
Why?
But it's
Why
not
is
going to
it
be the best
valuable?
slot for every single build every time.
I don't
One of the
understand.
things we
Please
wanted to do
explain
here is
why
still
it's
motivate you,
valuable.
and you should be
What?
to be mixing multiple.
And of course, building individual damage types are going to be more equal in value, mainly, like I said, about overpower. Overpower builds are just falling behind. Same with things like dot damage builds or minion focus builds. Those are going to come up and be much more comparable to builds like critical strike focused ones or vulnerable focused ones, and so on.
Wait, that one,
Yeah,
I don't
so we have a little
understand.
visual here, but imagine this is like
I'm
the
so
current season,
confused.
where crit and vuln builds are just really high up there. They're doing a ton of damage. They're wiping everything.
What the
And then
fuck
all the
just
other builds are
happened?
kind of pretty far behind, right? If you're not mixing these two things, then you're just less effective.
Maybe you do find a way to apply vulnerable, but it's not going to be the main focus of your
I
build.
don't understand.
You can also get
am
a
I
lot
the
of
only
skill
one?
ranks
How
to
are we
increase
getting
whatever your core
rewarded?
skill rank is. Those still
I don't
increase your core
understand.
skill damage multiplicatively with skill ranks, which goes back to what Adam had said earlier about how powerful skill ranks are going to be going forward.
Am I
in the Season of
dumb?
Blood.
What we were really afraid of when we were looking at doing these changes is that in a vacuum, if we did this and nothing else, we think that it could be a negative experience to the game, kind of what Charles alluded to.
Yes.
What I'm terrified of is that we do these changes and the reaction basically is, wait, you're lowering my damage and you're making it less rewarding to try and build crit and vuln. This is awful. I hate it, right?
Yes.
This isn't our goal, and we knew that
That's
we
what
had
you
to
did.
combine this with some other systemic updates to the game to make sure that this new world of itemization, damage buckets, and builds was something that's interesting and kind of has some meat to it as a player. And also, what we mentioned before is that we are, again, going to be tuning monsters to be more appropriate with the new player power level. Our goal here is that your player power difference should be minimal. If anything, you'll probably feel more powerful compared to before, just because of all the unique upgrades and other, class updates and changes that we're making to the game. So you shouldn't really have a huge difference in how you feel going through mobs and dungeons and things. Just you're having more options of how you do it. We want to add some multiplicative power back to the player, but in a more interesting way. Because as we mentioned before, we are removing multiplicative power by capping it with crit and vuln. So we want it now, like the upside of that is that we can actually give it back, but we can do it now in choices that you make as a player rather than it just being an underhood thing about how the game works. And then we also want to try and make the itemization experience better, particularly in the latter portions of the game. We want the stats you chase on your items to kind of be more tailored to your build and be a little bit more interesting. This isn't the end-all be-all of our plans for itemization, but this is just one way that we think we can try and make your stats and your gear and how they mix with your build a little bit more interesting.
I
now let's go
can't
through an
even
example.
right now.
So this is these kinds of effects are what we added kind of all over the place on all the classes of ways to give you multiplicative power. So on the left here is the old elemental summoner Paragon node legendary, Paragon legendary node on the sorcerer. And before it basically said, we want you to put all the conjuration skills on your bar. And when you do, they have reduced cooldown and mana cost per skill you have. This is your Hydra, your Ice Blades, and your Lightning Spear, right? We have one for each element. Now you're still going to get that. You can see on the right, this is the Season of Blood's design. So they still get reduced cooldown and mana cost, but now we've given you a goal to chase and a way to multiplicatively scale their damage. So the way it works here is that those conjuration skills are all going to deal multiplicative more damage based on the total amount of your bonus damage stat with fire, lightning, and cold. So here you can see, and I think these numbers actually match to what the current bonus is. So what we want you to do here is you go to your character sheet and you're like, okay, I want to get bonus damage to fire, lightning, and cold. These, are like your plus fire damage on your gear or whatever, right? Normally these stats aren't very attractive, but now they're going to be a lot more attractive because they will multiplicatively, these additive stats will now turn into multiplicative stats if you take this node and you go for this specific build.
That sounds nice.
And the other really neat thing about this is that it makes your Paragon board or Paragon nodes, and even we can make items or other effects more interesting where we say, hey, you get bonus non-physical damage. That will actually triple dip with this Paragon node legendary power because it will increase your damage with fire, lightning, and cold, and so it actually will triple the amount that this one node
That never
will give you in
works.
value for
That's
this
never
one
a good
legendary
thing.
power. And we've added these effects kind of all over the
That's
place.
always
It
a
makes you a lot more
mistake.
scaling. You're going to care about different stats that you didn't care about before because now they can be
Stonks.
multiplicative depending on what you get. Here's another one. This is one for the Rogue.
You
This
shouldn't
is
even
a
let us
redesign
double
that we're
dip.
doing for no witnesses. So what this does is, this one makes you care about your damage with ultimates stat. So this was a stat that could appear on your gear. It usually wasn't very good. No one really tried to chase it. But this says that now your ultimate skills on your rogue will deal multiplicative more damage based on that stat. And when you cast your ultimate, that multiplicative damage will apply to all of your skills for 8 seconds. So this kind of enables a complete new build with the rogue where you want to spam, you know, rain of arrows or whatever ultimate you can as often as you can, because even just using the ultimate is going to give you a multiplicative bonus, and that bonus on all of your skills will be based on this damage with ultimate stat that you can get via gear and Paragon and other places.
Yeah, I think Rogue is my
This is the
favorite
most
class to play that new
confusing
flicker step
thing
unit
ever.
on. Where
Yes,
when you're
you can
evading
combine
through
that,
enemies, you get a lot of ultimate cooldown reduction. It lets you trigger no witnesses more often. You want to build a lot of ultimate, and you can play it, you know, with Rain of Arrows or Shadow Clone or Death Trap. Any of them, it just feels really good and a much more cohesive package that lets you scale to a really strong late game build and is not just based around crit and vuln. It's now based around ultimate skill damage.
Patch notes are actually going to be coming after the stream, so you'll be able to read through every single class change, all the different changes that we even talked about last week on the stream.
I'm reading that tomorrow. I'm not reading that right after this. I want a training dummy.
We are adding in 121 is a training dummy, kind of a target dummy where you can actually practice builds, test out different you know, items and everything like that. This will be located in Kiovushad in a cellar, and you can actually customize it and change it from like a normal training dummy to, you know, adding additional ones or boss ones, and you'll actually be able to test out different builds. So this will be coming in 121. Just a reminder, I'm going to continuously say that so people don't go like, why wasn't it in on October 17th? 121. Yes. But this will be towards the end of this month. We'll have more information as that actually hits.
Okay, the damage cap stuff was completely confusing. That seems like the worst way to do it. I like to think what they meant was just a multiplicative cap between two things were capped. Surely, so you can still scale like 900 crit or vuln damage. That's the only thing I can understand. That surely you can still do like 900 vuln damage. It's just the combined from vuln and crit. If you have 600 crit multi and 900 vuln, you're only getting 50 extra. Like only 50 and 20 are getting multiplied. I think that's fine. I'll read the patch notes tomorrow. It's kind of late, and I want to play some games off stream. So we're going to read the patch notes tomorrow and then more on December. I don't know if I'm more excited after this. I'm not super excited for Season 2 of Diablo 4. I'm going to play it and hopefully I'll have a good time. I mean, okay, I'm a little excited because any reset is pretty exciting to me. So I'm planning to play like 5, 6, 7 days of Diablo 4 and then we're going to play Baldur's Gate with my friend Steel Mage. And that I am very, very excited for.